The Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme is the longest cycling ultramarathon in the world. The route is 9,100 kilometers long. It stretches from west to east across the whole of Russia and consists of 15 stages, from the shortest one, which is 260 kilometers long and could be crossed in a single stretch of daylight, to the longest, a distance of 1,368 kilometers, which takes participants more than 2 full days to cover.
Total elevation gain on this race is about 80,000 meters, so it's like climbing the Mount Everest 10 times by bicycle. Distance of the race is twice the Tour de France and 3 times Giro d'Italia.
When we ride together, we die together.
Riding alone is not a problem. The weather is a problem. I've never ridden in rain and all, but not this long.
This is beyond extreme. It's crazy.
You better not sign up for this if you're not prepared mentally.
The Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme starts on Revolution Square in Moscow, just 100 meters away from milepost 0 of the Russian motorways. The route lies along the legendary Trans-Siberian Railway that crosses the whole of Eurasia and links Moscow with the largest East Siberian and Far Eastern industrial cities. 15 of them host stages of the cycling ultramarathon. Athletes begin every stage together and race to the finish. But they are all bound by time limits. Within the set amount of time, the racers are free to ride however fast they like. They can stop to eat and sleep, but if they exceed the time limit, the stage results in disqualification. Also, if an athlete is unable to finish for whatever reason, they drop out of the general classification and continue competing in the minor category. After quitting for a 3rd time, they drop out of the race completely. The first half of the route takes the racers through cities with sprawling infrastructure, where heavy traffic, including lorries, really complicates things. To ensure their safety, each athlete is accompanied by a Volkswagen multivan with 2 professional Russian-speaking drivers. In addition to that, they're also accompanied by 10 organizing committee vehicles with multi-skilled specialists and a medical team that includes a cardiologist, a surgeon, and emergency care doctors.
Athletes have to be very attentive during the first 3 to 5 stages of the race, when the body rearranges itself most actively.
The athletes pass through several climate zones. They freeze at night, grapple with the wind and thaw in the heat. They force their way through walls of rainfall, all the time battling against their competitors and accumulated fatigue. The second half of the route, after Irkutsk, leads along the coast of Lake Baikal and further to the Far East through Ulan-Ude and Chita, ending in Vladivostok. After Ulan-Ude, there are fewer and fewer towns along the road. There are parts of the route almost totally devoid of infrastructure. There are no people, but the scenery is amazing.
I'm speechless. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. I never expected to see something like this. Just this morning, a friend called me from Spain, and I told him he should consider visiting Russia as a touristic destination, because it's really beautiful.
The first Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme started on June the 15th, 2015. There were 10 athletes from 6 countries participating in 2 categories: Solo, when an athlete rides the bike from start to finish of every stage, accompanied by the support team car. And duo, when the athletes take turns on their bikes during the whole stage, accompanied by 2 support team cars. The duo athletes can rest in the moving car between turns and maintain higher average speed without having to think through the stopping tactics on long stages, which is a privilege solo athletes can't afford, having to constantly look for balance between average speed and rest. Lack of said balance makes up the bulk of tactical errors. If the peloton maintains more than 40 kilometers per hour after the start, particularly on several stages in a row, the athlete's fear of falling behind and losing precious minutes to the leader makes them ignore their body's distress signals and attack at 100%. As a result, the body doesn't have enough time to recover between stages, and that causes real problems. Austrian cyclist Eduard Fuchs and Russian athlete Denis Majara were the first to face the typical Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme knee joint problems, from stress load pains to ligament strains and muscle tears. These injuries were found to be among the main reasons for many athletes quitting.
I thought about quitting the race due to health problems. I had pain in the knee and heel tendons, but I managed to recover psychologically and physically, so it was a good lesson.
Only 2 of the 4 solo athletes were able to complete all stages of Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme 2015 without quitting. The Brit Steve Harvey and the Belgian Christophe Allegaert, who played his own game from the very beginning.
And I want to cycle by my own, and I was keeping all the way along the same pace, but they were cycling like faster, faster, faster. So I just let them go, and that's the reason. So today I was the most stupid guy out of the group. Tomorrow will be different.
Using trial and error, Christophe worked out a tactic that included regular short stops for sleeping and also eating in the saddle. This tactic helped him outride the Italian duo. On the longest 1,368-kilometer Chita Svobodny stage, the 39-year-old Belgian finished 3 hours ahead of his competitors, which turned out to be enough to win the ultramarathon. In the duo category, the Russians gradually managed to impose their pace on Italian and German teams. Olympic champion Mikhail Ignatiev and world champion Ivan Kovalyov increased the time gap using bad weather and hilly terrain and recuperating on the plains and during mild weather, all the while poking fun at their competitors.
The locals said that these flies can swallow a man to the bone if they attack a pack in 3 minutes.
The Russian team constantly studied the landscape and experimented with tactics. For example, during the night ride over Kuzbass Barrows, the athletes pushed up the tempo, covering the 790-kilometer-long stage in 21 hours, 12 minutes and 31 seconds, hitting an average speed of 37.46 kilometers per hour. This resulted in a well-deserved victory for the Russian duo. Christophe Allegaert maintained the time gap and became the solo winner of the first Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme ultramarathon. The mistakes of 2015's first stages didn't change much for the next year's participants. From the very beginning, multiple Austrian triathlon champion Andreas Fuchs established such a high pace that even duos didn't dare to start attacking until there were only about 10 kilometers to go. Andreas was counting on his previous Trans-Siberian experience from 2014. That year, he had ridden from Moscow to Vladivostok in 13 days, 14 hours and 56 minutes, taking turns with Anatoly Nesterov as a duo.
It was a little idea for me to begin very hard in the beginning, so I hope that everybody gets tired when we come to the long stages. But I don't know Alexei, so he was the
very unknown in the beginning.
I was a bit shocked by this rate on the very first day, but I sort of did not want to fall behind on this first day. So I tried to keep up with the main pack, because you do not know what to expect from tomorrow.
The first day they were really impressive to me, because when you looked at the solo riders, they were riding like there's no tomorrow. And to me it was kind of a logical consequence of this style of riding, that it will only end in this moment, that some riders' bodies cannot do it anymore.
I have lost some part of skin, and it's very difficult to sit on the saddle.
My foot become bigger. I cannot sit on the saddle. And my hands start pain.
Only one solo athlete was able to keep up with the pace imposed by Andreas Fuchs. Professional Russian cyclist Alexei Shebilin proved to be an unsolvable puzzle for the decorated Austrian triathlete.
We have a good mix between fighting and share the road. Every hour we stopped to take a pee-pee break. It was a friendship, but no in the end.
Yeah, very, very emotional person. Yeah.
And I say to Alex, thank you for the hardest day in my life.
So he can give 120%, but when it's not happy with his job, so he goes down.
Stage 4 began at moderate speeds. Andreas Fuchs didn't push the pace and the athletes were taking their turns in the peloton. Alexei Shebilin saw that the power struggle was likely over. It was time for some tactical decisions.
I checked on what the terrain is like here yesterday, talked to the locals in the morning, so I knew that there is a mountain around here and that it's going to be a tough one for us.
Alexei attacked on the legs in the last mountain, so about 10-12 kilometers before the finish line. And then I have to push really, really hard to get close to him. Maybe this hard riding was too much. I tried to sprint with Alexei again, and I saw no chance with my knee.
On stages 5 and 6, it became clear that Alexei was going to use any opportunities to break away from Andreas on the hilly terrain. The time gap began to widen.
After the start, I noticed my knee make too much problems. It hurts just when we roll out easy out of the city. So I make the decision, it's too far finish line from the 6th stage, but also very, very far to the finish line to Vladivostok.
Nevertheless, Alexei Shebilin had no reason to celebrate yet. A year earlier, Andreas' fellow countryman and namesake solo athlete, Eduard Fuchs, had been forced to quit the stage after making a similar error. Eduard Fuchs took his 2015 mistakes into account and won 2 of this year's stages with a slight margin. By stage 8, he was less than a minute behind Alexei in the general classification. In addition, Eduard had already been in cycling ultramarathons, an experience Alexei was unfortunately unfamiliar with.
I stopped after I'd done 130 kilometers, when I was at a dead end, so to speak. Well, in principle, it was also planned to make a test stop to see how much sleep will be needed for the subsequent stages. So I took a 40-minute nap. I would basically still have chances of catching up because I hadn't had any sleep. He had been riding in this heat.
I did not sleep this stage because we drive only one night, and one night is no problem. The finish was very dramatic for me. 114 kilometers before end of the stage, I ride solo on the first place, and 4 kilometers before finish, Alexei come from behind, and we have on the last meter a very hot sprint.
This is how my goal was accomplished. I had found out how much sleep I would need during the following stages.
On stage 9, Alexei established his sleeping tactics, leaving Eduard Fuchs 90 minutes behind. By this time, the German duo was far ahead of the Russian team and feeling confident.
I think if only one of us would have had the possibility to this downhill, probably we would have to fight each other. The computer said I was going like 97 kilometers per hour. After some time, I realized that the other guy from the other duo team, he was just away. And I was really surprised as another guy from a solo starter just overtook.
Alexei Shebelin risked trying to catch up with the German team, and this proved to be the right decision. Protected by a police car, a group of reckless cyclists rushed along the mountain serpentines, anticipating a view of our planet's deepest lake. But right before Baikal, they got stuck in a traffic jam. Credit goes to the policemen who managed to ensure maximum safety for such an extreme ride. Stage 10 saw no changes in the bracket, while stage 11 just confirmed the balance of power. But battling against competitors is not the hardest thing in the longest cycling ultramarathon. This became clear on the King's stage.
Rain all day and all night, it's really like torture. It's hell. I'm really scared of the night. When it's raining again, shit. I can go in car every hour and warm up. When you do it solo, I think you get ill after this. But it was chance for Eddie to win. It was chance for Marcelo to win. That would be really funny.
Nobody could predict this stage because of the weather. It started raining from the very start. We were riding in the rain and headwind all night. We got absolutely everything today.
In addition to extreme weather conditions, endless hilly terrain turned the stage into full-blown torture. While riding uphill, the athletes kept the speed below 15 kilometers per hour because they were afraid of getting sweaty under their raincoats and then catching a cold during some speedy descent. At night, the temperature dropped to 8 degrees Celsius and the athletes stopped for a 2-hour break, hoping that the weather would improve by dawn, but it only got worse.
We've just made a stopover to examine the riders for fear that they might get pneumonia in weather like this. We still had 800 kilometers in the rain ahead of us, having already ridden 28 hours in the rain. The doctors said that our condition wasn't too good, but the decision was still left up to us.
I think they didn't have any other choice, you know. They could have continued and probably get ill, or they could have continued and arrive tomorrow in the morning and just go to the next stage.
The weather was so bad today, and we could not keep up the previous pace. It was really tough. It became clear that if anyone drops out, I have to carry on alone, because no one else could set the pace. I worked out that alone, I can't complete the distance in the allotted time. Together with Marcelo and Fuchs, we decided to stop because it was physically impossible to keep on moving. Well, I think this race is called extreme for a reason. But we still had to stop because of this extremeness that we weren't able to endure. I have no regrets. There was simply no other option. If there will be an opportunity to participate in the next year's race, I will try myself on this road once again. Yes, we've been warned of the consequences. I mean that the winner will not be declared the winner of the race, but health and safety are important too, really.
In the harsh conditions of constant downpour and headwind, the duos kept going. The Russian duo was having a particularly hard time because there was practically nowhere to sleep inside the car. Roman Markaryan and Mikhail Manyakhin weren't able to lie down and stretch properly, which had a negative impact on their rest and recovery. The German team, ready for any challenge, be it from their competitors or nature itself, kept moving and widening the gap. With the help of Alina Landman, a physical therapist who had accompanied the German team the previous year, all processes inside the vehicles were meticulously arranged even before the race began. Athletes didn't have to think about food, recuperation or minor technical issues. They concentrated only on conquering the longest and hardest stage.
It's really impressive to see that there is a limit to what a body can do, and that's what everyone is aiming for. You want to finish a race and do the whole thing, and not being able to do it because it's so strong or so hard to do is probably the hardest race in the world, yes.
Consequently, only duo teams reached the finish of the longest stage of the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme. The German team, despite monstrous weather conditions, finished 3 hours ahead of the Russian duo. They managed to maintain the gap on the last 2 stages and won the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme 2016. The Russian team managed to get to the finish and stay in the general classification despite the bad injury sustained by one of the racers. The solo athletes recovered after 2 of the hardest days of their lives and finished the next 2 stages without quitting. Eduard Fuchs was first in Vladivostok, finishing the race overall second in the solo classification. Alexei Shebelin posted the best solo time, while Marcelo Florentino Suarez finished third. Both athletes were happy to finish the toughest test of their lives and promised to come back to ride the whole distance from Moscow to Vladivostok again next year. The dropout of all solo athletes set the world cycling community agog. A record number of professional ultracyclists applied for participation. It was decided that only solo racers will take part. On July the 18th, 2017, natives of 8 countries formed up at the starting line of the longest cycling ultramarathon, the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme. For the first time ever, there were 2 female solo competitors, an American, Thursday Gervais, and Shangri-La Rendon from the Philippines. But 8 strong male racers, including participants in and the winner of the Race Across America ultramarathon, Pierre Bishop, apparently having ignored the history of the previous years, pushed the pace on the very first stage. Customarily, the peloton rushed through the first 2 stages at 40 kilometers per hour. A few kilometers short of stage 2's finish, the American cyclist Thursday Gervais quit for the first time.
I didn't get any recovery sleep last night after coming in, so that probably had an effect on my body as well. In fact, I know it did. So it was just a better choice to just cut the stage.
A total of 4 participants weren't able to reach the finish of stage 3. The American dropped out for the second time, joined by the Filipino cyclist Shangri-La Rendon, the Russian Yegor Kovalchuk and the Brit Adrian O'Sullivan. All 4 of them weren't able to hit an average speed high enough to make it within the time limit. For the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme head physical therapist Andrei Prakudin, this could only mean one thing. Soon his team will have to deal with injuries.
The racers experience simply unbelievable stress. Their bodies first use hormonal release to cope with it. But then the hormone levels drop while the stress stays. That's when the body starts to adjust to it.
There are 3 physical therapists on Andrei Prakudin's team. Their work begins even before a stage of the ultramarathon starts. The athletes are thoroughly examined and offered taping. During a stage, 1 medical and 2 physical therapist vehicles monitor them closely and provide necessary treatment as quickly as possible. After the finish, all athletes need recuperation procedures. Besides traditional massage using myofascial release, physical therapy team uses muscle toning and a cryotherapy machine that stops the muscles releasing lactic acid and provides deep relaxation. By the end of stage 4, the general tempo slowed down and the time for tactical decisions came. Alexei Shebelin understood the threat of the 3 Danes who had been pushing the tempo during the first stages. What they said to each other was a mystery, and also they were fellow countrymen who could support each other, thus shifting the balance of power. Besides that, Pierre Bischoff confidently held the tempo, apparently having no physical difficulties and adapting well. On stages 5 and 6, Alexei used last year's tactics and attacked while riding uphill. The Danes had not recovered well and were pushed to their limits.
You can clearly see when they are exhausted. They stop every 30 minutes for a pee break. If they're feeling okay, there's no persuading them to stop. And here they stop, stop, stop. And I'm like, bingo, they're done.
Food points are real islands of tranquility for the athletes. Every 150 or 200 kilometers, all participants in the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme project are able to have a full hot dinner made by Heiko Appenroth, the chef and catering boss.
We have 7 people in our team. We're driving with 3 cars and can fit everything for about a week already on our trip. We do have to occasionally get up very early in the morning because when everyone else is just waking up and going for breakfast, we're usually already on the road buying our supplies. After that, we right away hit the road. We go to the first point of break. Over the last few years, we've allocated the best spots, which is very difficult because the bikers have to be able to stop quickly. It needs to fit all these 25 cars we have. Every athlete has his personal food which he likes, but every athlete is totally different from what he requires. This changes within days, and it can be anything they suddenly would like, from meat to veggies to, like I said, nuts, anything.
You know, something that you look forward to, moving towards the food stops, that you can get some real food instead of the sugar products that you normally eat.
It's important to note that the athletes always decide among themselves how much time they're going to spend at food points. If an athlete catches up with the leaders at the food point, nobody objects to their joining the peloton right away. They can have the food for themselves and their teams put into plastic containers, and then find the right moments and consume it piece by piece while in the saddle. Only 5 athletes were able to reach the finish of stage 7 while still being part of the general classification. Knee joint pain that had become typical for this stage forced the Dane Aske Solberg to drop out. Michael Knudsen dropped out on stage 8 due to similar symptoms.
Maybe we pushed too hard in the first stages, but in this race you cannot let the other guys go because you also have a time to cut off. So if you just let them go, you are also out of the race after 3 stages.
Stage 9 of Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme is over 1,000 kilometers long. It's the second longest and also one of the hilliest. Only 4 athletes remained in the general classification.
I think I'll see if we can manage to have maybe a 15-minute break so that we can sleep 10 minutes.
It was my tactical decision to leave Pierre with Peter, or Marcello, no matter, with someone who could not help him, so I could fight him. It was probably a psychological battle.
Alexei was waiting for the right moment. When the Brazilian Marcelo Florentino Soares suddenly attacked while on the gravel road, the Russian supported him and both racers broke away.
In one situation, Peter and I looked to each other and we began just laughing because we are so stupid to make something crazy like this.
The Russian finished stage 9 first. Marcelo was an hour behind him, while Pierre Bischoff and Peter Sandholt arrived 1 hour and 20 minutes after the leader. Ahead of them were a day of rest and two of the most picturesque stages of the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme.
In many ways, I would wish I was home with my family. It's a beautiful country, it's a nice race, but I don't know. This is beyond extreme. This is crazy.
I realize that Russia is only for mammoths, only for the strongest. That says it all.
Only 4 athletes of the 10 who had started in Moscow were able to reach the longest stage of the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme. They all continued competing in the general classification. Ahead of them were 1,368 kilometers from Chita to Svobodny.
If you skipped the 1,400 kilometers, one can probably say you didn't take part in the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme at all.
First, the athletes rode together as a group. On the second day, Alexei Shebelin attacked and broke away.
It's better to ride alone on this stage because you don't concentrate on the others. Their pace is slow and it lulls you to sleep.
The athletes spread out along the road and kept on riding, each keeping their own tempo. The weather changed frequently. It rained at night, but still it was nothing like last year's natural disaster.
I really enjoyed this downpour. It was unforgettable. Nature was testing me, reminding me of 2016.
For me, it was fun to have 2 nights to ride with heavy weather conditions. It is really tough when you think about after 2.5 weeks to get the king stage, but it makes fun to survive.
Peter Sandholt is the last Dane of the 3 who made the starting line in Moscow. During the whole stage, he struggled with accumulated fatigue, stopping for sleep several times, but ultimately dropped out with only 200 kilometers left to go. Alexei Shebelin won the longest stage of the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme. He also set the new stage record, 52 hours and 29 minutes. Pierre Bischoff arrived second, 1 hour and 25 minutes behind Shebelin. Marcelo Florentino Suarez was third, 3 hours and 50 minutes behind the leader. Next day, the weather finally took its toll. During daylight hours, the 3 cyclists rode through heavy rain. But this had no impact on the general classification. The athletes completed the last 2 stages together and finished in Vladivostok.
One impression, that I could withstand it, the very longest stage, 1,400 kilometers. In fact, I did not even imagine how heavy it is.
Before I came here, I have set will be interesting where are my limits, because I never expected that it could be possible that cycling kills me, yeah? And now I see that it's possible that cycling can kill me.
In all 3 years of the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme, only 5 of the 20 solo athletes were able to complete the whole distance without dropping out. Only 3 of those managed to do it on the first attempt. Pierre Bischoff was one of them.
Last year I have looked too much for the others, and this year I know I can look a little bit, but I have also to do my own race, and instead of this it will be another race than last year.
Second place wasn't enough for Pierre. The German ultra-cyclist spent a year training and returned to write down his name in the history of the longest cycling ultramarathon once again. As it turned out, he wasn't the only one who wanted to do so.
Last year I had to DNF, did not finish, my first race ever I didn't complete. And for example, Marcelo was clever last year. Sometimes we attack, and he just dropped back and then soft pedal. Maybe he lost 20 minutes, but he got to the finish.
Marcelo Florentino Soares, a 46-year-old Brazilian athlete who first raced in the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme in 2016. His physical condition had been a concern for the medical team and his competitors alike. From the very first stage, he'd fallen far behind the peloton and was barely making it within the time limit. After finishing, he'd literally been carried inside the hotel and into the hands of a physio team every time.
Once he was literally unable to reach the door of his room by himself and collapsed in the corridor. It was in Krasnoyarsk. So we had to lift him and carry him onto the massage table and perform all the treatment he needed, and then carried him back to his room.
But then he'd surprise everyone by showing up at the start. Finishing with no time left and repeating the whole routine all over again. Ultimately, though, he had twice been in the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme top 3 in 2016 and 2017. But why did he return for a third time?
Marcelo is a street child. He was born in poor Brazil, grew up on the streets of Brazil, and cycling made him not rich, but at least to live a comfortable life. We had offered Marcelo and some other cyclists to Hilton, and Hilton chose Marcelo and Michael Knudsen to sponsor.
This race has already become a part of my life. It's all I can think about 24 hours a day. It's what motivates me in life. It's what I live for, so that's why I come every year, and I'm going to keep coming.
2018's longest cycling ultramarathon will not only be remembered for a classic battle for leadership, but by every participant's determination to reach Vladivostok. The athletes said as much before the start, but not all of them managed to sustain their will to win. Nizhny Novgorod is not only the final point of stage 1, but also the birthplace of professional cyclist Vladimir Gusev. This decorated Russian athlete broke away from the peloton with 60 kilometers to go and finished 3 minutes ahead of his closest pursuer.
I felt no pain knowing that I was riding into my hometown.
On stages 2 and 3, Vladimir made more attempts to break away, but Pierre Bischoff decided not to give up without a fight and locked horns with him. He minimized his food point rest time and used many kilometer traffic jams as a means to break away from the peloton, forcing Vladimir to leave his support team car behind.
If my support car gets stuck in a jam or if I'm left alone without food, most likely I'm going to stop and go blast some ducks to get food. Because without food, I can't go without food.
Vladimir was catching up with Pierre and returning the favor by attacking during uphill rides. But this exhausted both athletes. They risked overstraining their bodies. Stages 4 and 5, both around 300 kilometers long, were complicated by the weather. A constant headwind was added to the downpour.
We had a lot of rain and a lot of headwind, and sometimes I look on my speed and see just 25 and I pushed hard and I don't come forward.
On stage 5, after the food point, Vladimir broke away and finished 19.5 minutes ahead. Pierre chose to fight the wind with the peloton, saving energy for the next stage, which was going to be twice as long. As if rain and headwind weren't enough, during the night the temperature fell to just 1 above 0. Ignoring the risk of breaking a sweat and catching a cold, Pierre Bischoff started to gain velocity. Only Vladimir Gusev was able to keep up with his pace. This time all the athletes were at risk because the next start in Omsk was set for the evening of the same day as the previous finish. It means that the fastest racers, Bischoff and Gusev, got 5 more hours of sleep than the Spaniard Patricio Ducet, who'd barely made it within the time limit. But was that enough to recover? They didn't have to wait long to find out. Almost immediately after the start of stage 7, Vladimir Gusev called the mechanics.
He felt discomfort in his right knee. He loosened it with a hex key and moved it, adjusting it just like on the left leg.
Stage 7 of the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme has always been the turning point for all athletes. In 2018, only one racer wasn't able to complete it, the Russian Vladimir Gusev. An old knee injury prevented him.
The pain is unbearable, and I just can't force myself to go on. And then what? Walk on crutches? It's not worth it. Right now, I can tell you officially that he quit the stage after 60 kilometers and will continue riding in a minor category. You should be crazy to ride the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme.
Vladimir Gusev had been considered a strong favourite, dropped out of the general classification and could no longer compete for victory or top places. After stage 7, Pierre Bishop was 6.5 hours ahead of Michael Knudsen, who now held second position. But the participants had covered less than half of the ultramarathon's total distance, 3,321 of 9,103 kilometres. And we know from experience that these kinds of distances, along with the weather, could meddle with a racer's psychological and physical equilibrium. Several dropouts had already happened in that fashion. The Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme is a serious test, as much for the athletes as for their bikes. As if to illustrate that, on stage 9, the Spaniard Patricio Ducet made a classic tired cyclist's mistake. It took the mechanic team 7 minutes to reach him, substitute his bike for a temporary one, and start repairing the broken mechanism.
When his bike went uphill, the rear derailleur tore into the spokes, twisted the hanger and broke.
A half-hour repair job in field conditions, and Patricio is back spinning the pedals of his own bike.
We have 4 mechanics in our team. Our main task is to provide technical support.
The bulk of the mechanics' work consists of daily maintenance rather than breakdowns on the road. While the athletes enjoy the long-awaited massage and physio, the mechanics whip their bikes into shape, wash, lubricate, adjust them, and fix small faults.
To avoid all problems, ideally you have to have more backup bikes. 3 would be optimal. Aside from that, you would well do to have at least 3 pairs of spare wheels, 1 per racer, so that if something happens, you could quickly change the wheel and the rider could be back into contention. There were large crushed stones on the gravel road, and the race leader, Pierre Bishop, burst the rim of the rear wheel. This was an unpleasant moment, but it did not stop him from keeping on the race. I would recommend choosing a bike that is as simple and reliable as possible. Because on such long, super long distances, breakdowns happen often. And to find some specific shifter or component in Siberia is very hard. That's why I believe that reliability should be the main factor.
The longest stage of the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme is 1,368 kilometers long. The participants call it the King Stage, and it has always been the focus of special attention. Last year, Pierre Bishop finished second. The gap between him and the leader, Shibelin, was the widest on this stage, and the outcome of their rivalry was decided. This year, Shibelin is the race's chief judge. When Vladimir Gusev quit, Pierre lost his main rival and set a new goal: to top Shibelin's time on the King Stage.
My tactics for today on the King Stage is to ride like race across America, to have less stops as possible. So My sleep tactics will be totally to sleep something around 1 hour, but in 2 or 3 times.
Minimal traffic and a total lack of railroad crossings are unique features of the Chita Svobodny stage. There are viaducts wherever Amur motorway crosses the railway. The road surfacing is usually in good shape with very few roadblocks because no one uses it. It means that there are no major obstacles for the racers along the way, except for the weather, which inevitably had a couple of surprises in store again.
Riding alone is not a problem. The weather is a problem. I've done rides in rain and all, but not this long.
The first night greeted the participants with heavy rain, and many thought it was shaping out like 2016's weather collapse. But in the morning, the rain stopped and fog coated the road.
I don't really know if it's day or night because it looks like nothing. The last 50k I cry a lot and I scream a lot because when you don't let the emotion out, you get sick of your own emotions.
Historically, the struggle between competitors has always been brought to a close at the finish of the longest stage. The gaps between them are usually hours wide, and after such exhausting tests, the athletes take no risks and look to maintain the status quo during the final stages. Somebody quits this stage every year, and 2018 was no exception. At the end of day 2, the Spaniard Patricio Ducet dropped out after taking the risk of attempting to keep up with the peloton.
La decisión fue porque veía que los tiempos, decimos, estaba dentro del tiempo de llegar.
I feel that I could finish the stage today, but I would have finished in such bad shape that I could not have been able to complete the next stages.
Y me pegué el estrellazo.
Last year, Marcelo Florentino Suarez arrived third and became the first Brazilian to complete the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme. His resilience inspired the Indian Amit Samath to test his own durability. From the start of the very first stage, he had only one goal: to complete the whole distance without ever leaving the general classification.
I don't go with the peloton because in the beginning they will force a lot of speed. They will try to ride fast and all, and then you cannot keep up with them for 1,000 kilometers. That's a very, very long distance.
The German ultra-cyclist Pierre Bischof's second attempt was a success. He managed to ride through the longest stage alone and beat Alexei Shabelin's record time from last year by almost 3 hours, taking 49 hours, 46 minutes and 35 seconds to complete the route.
My emotions on the King stage was just to show that will be a good move for the next editions to make on the King stage a solo time trial. Because on the King stage with 1,400 kilometers you have to play a lot with your sleeping tactic, with your food station tactic, if you stay or not. And I'm sure the time which I've set, it's not the fastest one, it can be broken again.
Michael Knudsen arrived more than 4 hours behind the leader, while Marcelo Florentino Suarez lost another 2 hours to the Dane. Amit Samath arrived last. They kept that order in the general classification through the last 2 stages and up to the finish line in Vladivostok. The last 3 kilometers of the longest cycling ultramarathon lead along the Russian bridge. Crossing the eastern Bosphorus Strait, anticipating the finish, the athletes didn't hold back their emotions. After 9,100 kilometers and 300 hours in the saddle, they can finally relax, knowing that not only have they endured fierce competition, they've also surpassed themselves. For the first time ever, 4 solo athletes reached the finish of the longest cycling ultramarathon. The winner and runners-up were all making their second attempts at the competition. They realised their sports ambitions and wrote down their names in the history of the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme. The Indian physician Amit Samarth was 33.5 hours behind the leader and had been alone from the very beginning, struggling with rains, headwinds and endless hills, all to become the first Asian to complete the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme cycling ultramarathon.
The objective which I came here is fulfilled, and I wanted to finish the race and finish all the stages. So I'm extremely happy with the outcome, and of course it's a lot of hard work and it is a very hard race. I would say I didn't expect it to be that hard, but it is very hard. Mind as well as the body, both. It's too long and too hard.
For the Brazilian Marcelo Florentino Soares, this was perhaps the hardest of his 3 attempts. The Dane Michael Knudsen had managed to get no further than Krasnoyarsk the year before, but this time was able to finish what he started. From the very beginning, he was among the 3 runners-up and ultimately finished second. Pierre Bishop was not only able to win the race this time, but also to break the King Stage record set by Alexei Shebelin.
The Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme has its name because it's an extreme race. You have to be focused on every stage. It doesn't matter if it's a 300-kilometer stage or 1,400 stage. Every stage in itself is quite hard because when you're finished, you feel empty, you feel tired, but you know you haven't finished when you're not reached Vladivostok. And that makes the race really hard.
I would describe it as the mentally hardest thing I've ever done.
The 2017 winner, Alexei Shebelin, is still the fastest athlete to ever complete the whole distance of the Red Bull Trans-Siberian Extreme, with his time of 312 hours, 16 minutes and 58 seconds.